There's an interesting parallelism between the notion of the feminine mystique and the devouring mother archetype. Not only are they both pathological conceptualizations of an otherwise healthy woman and mother, respectively, but both demand a sacrifice of agency and the fragmentation of one's soul for their manifestation, either from the child or the woman herself. The feminine mystique and the powerful vortex of its hierarchy of fulfillment, when not struggled against, engulfs the woman's very being, leaving only a sense of stagnation. This idea of only one legitimate self is unbearable for women, and its effects of psychic splintering were clearly visible in the protagonists of Second Place, The Dry Heart, and Splinters. For each work, I determined the internal and external factors of their dissatisfaction and stagnation. Then I comparatively analyzed their strategies in overcoming them and evaluated their outcomes. I organized this essay and its arguments around three key vices and their virtuous counterparts. This analysis yielded that only M of Second Place properly overcame the feminine mystique's challenges because she retrieved her agency in a way that also resolved her inner turmoil. It became evident to me that indecision, fixation, and lack of critical self-reflection were the deadly shortcomings of Splinters and the Dry Heart's protagonists, paving the way for their failure, while M demonstrated the flexibility, courage, and self-awareness necessary to spare herself from the same fate. What's led Leslie to catapult herself into her marriage with C, which I firmly hold was doomed from the start, was her complex of abandonment, stemming all the way back to her father, with which she coped through male-centeredness and extreme people-pleasing. Despite her romantic ideals, Leslie surrendered to the part of herself that worshipped the feminine mystique's message and convinced herself that helping fulfill C's wish would be the single greatest undertaking of her life. She did all this without ever realizing it is precisely said people-pleasing that created the large rift necessary to keep up appearances, shattering any chances of real intimacy with C or with men in general. This mental rift manifested in many ways that exacerbated the feelings of loneliness within the marriage. Our home was a place in which I'd come to feel alone, and so in retaliation or from depletion, I made C feel alone too. His barbed comments left me so frayed that I stopped trying to detect or soothe the hurt beneath them. Indeed, her mother and female friendships, she felt, are the only avenues of interrelating that do not require earning love through self-mutilation. Moreover, C's distorted, antagonizing performance of pain left her incapable of and unwilling to extend empathy. Despite her astute awareness of these external and internal challenges, using said awareness to alter behavior was inaccessible to Leslie. Having the courage to let her marriage and consuming toxic love break down was all the progress she could muster in reclaiming her agency from the feminine mystique's clutches. Thereafter, I believe she dealt with the lack of agency domesticity afforded her by attempting to embody all of herself. And whilst her attempt to lead a full life and respect her many different needs is admirable, because she didn't think critically about what her innermost desires, core values, and priorities were before springing to action, she found herself in an endless satanic revolt against anything and everything. A vicious cycle of pushing against the constraints of the feminine mystique by compartmentalizing her motherhood, and then feeling shame for not prioritizing it enough. For instance, whilst in the marriage, her career allowed her to expand and served as the primary line of defense against her primal drive to dissolve. Yet, domesticity's hierarchical superiority reared its ugly head, as the goodness of being her mother felt absolute. The goodness of making art was trickier, more like quicksilver, marbled with vanity. Every moment I spent away from her felt like a moment that needed to be redeemed. Her daughter was also not sufficient in filling in the void within her, because she brought stability and continuity while shutting down avenues for reckless passion, chaos, and romance. Alas, creating space for that hunger only exacerbated her cognitive dissonance. It felt shameful to be only half present with her because I was flirting with a man across an ocean, like I'd forgotten what decade of my own life I was inhabiting. This recurring turmoil left readers like me wondering how long she can keep this up, as her inconsolable splinters implode and destroy everything in their vicinity time and time again. Her fixation with having it all and refusal to prioritize some selves over others stemmed from her underlying aversion towards having to decide or compromise. This allowed her to hold on to a kind of pseudo-autonomy. However, like a double-edged sword, it was also her undoing in reaching proper inner harmony and emancipation. According to Leslie, she wanted to believe that maternal love could be bolstered by everything else you longed for: friends, work, sex, the world, rather than measured by your willingness to leave these longings unanswered. But that trying to inhabit all these selves at once felt like solving an LSAT word problem about a dinner party where X didn't want to sit next to Y, who couldn't sit next to Z. Therefore, the way out of her mental anguish is clear. She must gather the courage to rid herself of the self that wants everything. It is clear to me that her progress toward liberation is doomed to remain in perpetual limbo, unless she divorces from that pipe dream instead. Splinter's take on internal fragmentation was just as relevant for the unnamed protagonist of The Dry Heart. However, while Leslie's construction of her agency necessitated breaking off the marriage, the efforts of The Dry Heart's unnamed protagonist took place within and through her marriage. According to my analysis, her real love was never Alberto, but the vague imaginary man in her head, a woman's idea of a man, as evidenced by her words, "Before I knew Alberto, I used to feel so dull and unattractive, but after I got the impression that he was in love with me, I began to think that if I could please him, then I might please someone else too, perhaps the man who spoke to me in ironical and tender phrases in my imagination." With Alberto as the means to this end of hers, she displayed a startling devotion to the ideals of the feminine mystique, surrendering to the current of her obsession with him and allowing it to consume her. However, given her motivations, I saw in this surrender a kind of struggle for agency as well. The truth is, she was experiencing an internal conflict from the get-go, with the well of melancholia as her main adversary. I felt that he was a little like me, with his eyes continually staring into a well of darkness within him. Fixated on Alberto's initial interest, she saw marriage with him as a way of overcoming this adversary, of staying on the surface of the well. Nevertheless, the object of her obsession turned out to be a direct foil to herself, an empty, shallow man without any weight or substance to him, too afraid or lazy to feel anything, to suffer in any way, a cork bobbing on the surface of the sea, who hates people who are always searching inside themselves and trying to find some meaning to life. Therefore, in ironical contrast to her hopes, all Alberto amounted to was undermining her agenda, pushing her deeper and deeper into the well, and aggravating her internal fragmentation so much that she could no longer function by the end. In the face of such danger, I hold that the murder of her husband was merely a failed attempt at self-defense, as she had not done the self-reflection necessary by then, echoing Leslie from Splinters, to be able to commit fully to the reclamation of her agency. This also explains, I believe, why there's no clear catalyst to her violent resistance. It was an act of desperation on her part. She was so obsessively in love with him that divorcing or separating would not have delivered her from his mental hold. Vulnerable and confused about her desires, she was aware of her own weakness, and thus, paradoxically, gathered the courage necessary to take the drastic measure required. Yet, her serving Alberto T simultaneously was a crucial aspect of it. In my view, this elucidates not only how internally split she had become by then, but also how ingrained the feminine mystique and the urge to conform to it was in her mind still, even as she committed the most extreme act of insurgency against them. In short, as in Splinters, The unnamed protagonist found the challenges of reconciling her different selves and constructing her agency within the marriage insurmountable due to her confusion, obsession, and inflexibility, resulting in her seeking respite in death since she could not find it in life. When I reached the kitchen, I knew what I was going to do. It was very easy, and I was not afraid. I would never talk to anyone again, not to Francesca, or Giovanna, or Augusto, or my mother, to no one. Finally, I interpreted the struggle between characters L and M in second place as an externalization of M's inner conflict between her mother and artist's selves, in line with the overarching theme of inner fragmentation. However, unlike Splinters and the Dryheart, M managed to confront her internal conflict appropriately, through carefully deliberating between her two selves and ultimately favoring one over the other. The midlife crisis and post-everything phase were side effects of the feminine mystique M experienced. It initially prompted her to define herself through others and adopt a self-sacrificial lifestyle, but left her spiritually stranded once her biological purpose was completed. As an objective correlative and one of M's strategies for reconstructing autonomy, the second place in question represented many things: women's secondary status in art and life, a bridge built for connecting her and Tony's preformed selves. Principally, though, I understood it as an attempt at holding on to the identity and personal narrative she lost after taking on motherhood, the road not taken. Still, her efforts to reclaim her sense of womanhood were counteracted by a paradoxical emotion: her covetous envy of the masculine freedom exemplified by L. Tony, who loved her unreservedly, did not inspire such jealousy, for he was defined by domesticity and realism. Tony is free, and his freedom doesn't look like much. He epitomized the will in harmony with nature and was the moral center of the novel. Not judgmental or deceitful like Art or L, he frequently exposed and challenged the artist within M. For me, Tony's differences were a test of my ability to contain my own will, which was always straining to make everything how I wanted and thought it should be, to make it conform to my idea. Conversely, L exercised his freedom to rebel against reality and pour outside its dictates, as perfectly illustrated with his disagreement in killing the deer. Her wish for L to paint her was therefore her second, albeit more desperate strategy for reconstructing herself. No longer able to see herself from the lens afforded by the feminine mystique, she hoped for the artist's gaze, i.e., the male gaze, to give her form. Consequently, I understood L's hellish Eden painting as the ultimate catalyst for the marked shift in M's psyche, as it allowed M to face the personification of her artist self, what she would metamorphose into through her persistence in pushing boundaries, the monstrous Eve. Her self-reflection and mental flexibility facilitated a shift in her perspective towards L, revealing him as a devil on earth and the real destitute one. When these deficiencies became conspicuous, he transformed from an aspirational figure into a pitiful one in her mind, a cautionary tale. Thus, in her quest to integrate her artist self, M instead came to question the worth of art itself. She properly appraised her priorities and took responsibility through backtracking, which allowed her to hold on to the family she built, what really mattered to her. As I saw it, in choosing Tony by decisively and after proper introspection, renouncing the call of the void, she came to terms with herself, asserted true agency, and resolved her inner conflict, which turned her artist self dormant, since turmoil and discomfort are integral for the artistic process. In closing, Neither Leslie's transgression of society's life script in search of authenticity, nor the Dryheart's protagonist's embodiment of said life script to prove her worthiness of being loved, amounted to much regarding their inner completeness. This is in stark contrast with M's remarkable progress at owning her life path, finding a renewed sense of appreciation for it, and achieving inner harmony as a result. For me, it was evident that a lack of insight due to a failure in honest introspection, maladaptive rigidity and stubbornness, along with an inability to choose, were persistent deficiencies found in both Splinter's and the Dryheart's women leads, which logically accounted for why their mutiny against the feminine Mystique's restraints did not deliver fulfillment. Inversely, M set herself apart in my eyes with her sharp, reflective temperament, mental flexibility, and decisiveness, committing to the life trajectory and self that would serve her best, and defining herself anew within that framework. Their difference of outcomes illuminated for me the importance of respecting the duality inherent to decision-making. That is, how crucial it is for the foundation of one's actions to be solidly rooted in reason, even as we acknowledge and make room for the uncomfortable and inconvenient feelings in the process leading up to the final decision.